Well, thank you all for being here. We'll keep this relatively short since it's the end of the day. And this by no means is supposed to be a prescription for how to build a development business, just telling you a little bit about how we've approached building a business, the lessons and mistakes that we've learned, and what we envision sort of coming up for the next couple of years. So Toronto Standard, contrary to what some might think, is only a 2.5-year-old business that we started at the beginning of 2024. 3 business partners, myself, my brother Chris, and my other partner, who coincidentally is also named Chris, who's somewhere in the room. And we had been investing in real estate projects and had some experience prior to starting this business, focused on some multiplex developments, focused on high-rise land assembly, but generally speaking, sort of as hobbyists, side of desk. And as the policy started changing, we really realized that there was an opportunity to build something more durable in the city. But when we started the business, I think the first challenge that we faced was that we had this sort of credibility problem. We were relatively new to this industry. We had not built 50 buildings before. We were out talking to capital partners, investors, lenders, and making ourselves credible to landowners who wanted to sell their properties. And effectively, we had to establish ourselves as a credible player in an emerging space. And I think very thematically in line with what we've been talking about today, we found that edge as it related to policy changes. Policy changes that were happening so quickly in the city that many, many people were having a hard time understanding where was the market, where was the next opportunity, and we really immersed ourselves in being on the front line of the ongoing changes to policy at the municipal level, the provincial level, and federal level. And some of the policy changes that really unlocked an aha moment for our business were, things that we've talked a lot about today and prior years at the conference, not exhaustively listed here, but things like the Major Streets Policy. When we bought our first site in 2023, this was a draft policy circulating at the city that we knew was very likely on its way to becoming approved policy. So we bought a property on Kipling Avenue in anticipation of that policy change. Same thing with the Avenues expansion. When we first saw that draft map on Avenues expanding, we started looking for lots that would effectively allow us to build what hadn't previously been possible. We did this in a number of ways. We stay sort of on the edge of policy by following what's going on at committee, surrounding ourselves with good planners and consultants who know this stuff in greater detail than we do. But we also host a podcast. We host events like this to force ourselves to stay on the front edge. Naturally, the PMTSA policies, purpose-built rental, I put that in there just to point out that it's only as of 2018 that rent control still existed for newly developed buildings in the province of Ontario. And that change at the provincial level unlocked a huge amount of opportunity for rental developers to start seeing this as a feasible asset class that actually could take institutional capital. So we started immersing ourselves here, and in the process started building out a business to then build up the type of credibility that most investors want to see is, have you actually built buildings before? And so the long-term goal from the beginning was to build this higher end of what we consider the missing middle, this boutique mid-rise. In Toronto, we really see that as sort of the 40 to 60 unit, 6-story, some cases up to 8 stories, depending on where you're building, on major streets, on avenues in the city for long-term hold, infill in neighborhoods that we believed in, either transit-oriented or amenity-rich neighborhoods that still had a long way to go in terms of housing options. But the problem with some of these projects is that these projects take time. Our first project pictured here is Kipling Avenue. We bought this property before the Major Streets Policy was enacted. We then got really excited when the Major Streets Policy was enacted, only to be unpleasantly surprised by a very lengthy appeal process that happened at the OLT. All of this that really caused delays for us to get this thing in the ground and say, hey, we've got our first proof point that we know what we're doing. So in parallel to watching these relatively slow and changing policy processes play out, we also put our minds to how can we do stuff that is a little bit faster to get into the ground. And so we started focusing on the other end of the missing middle spectrum on smaller, walk-up, 3 to 4 story. I'll say bigger than multiplexes. We do have a sixplex coming up in our pipeline, but things like 10 units, 15 units, in some cases 20 plus units, not quite mid-rise, but somewhere in between this multiplex and mid-rise scale. 2026 really for us has become the year of proving that we know how to get into this next phase of the business. As I said, 2.5 years in, only now are we starting to get some of our projects into construction. We had built projects before starting the business when we were still hobbyists at this. This year, we're going to see 4, if not 5 projects go into construction. Optimistically, we'll do 175 units starting this year. And so really, this is where the rubber meets the road. We want to start showing how our pro formas turn into reality. We were really good at building pro formas. My background is in finance and accounting. Building pro formas, selling a pro forma, selling a pitch was one thing. Selling the ability to execute, to build at the price that you want to build. And we're now getting those reps in. So we're now tendering projects. We're now on site on a couple of projects. We now have a construction staff on our team. And all of this with a view towards repeating, doubling down, and building the pipeline as we go into the next 3 years of the business. So 2026 really is a proof point for us. And for those of you who know us, we're very much an open book. So if you want to learn from us, we've been learning a lot from people in this industry that are 1 or 2 steps ahead of us, trying to figure out the mistakes that other people have made so we don't make those same mistakes. And we're sort of offering that back to people that are just starting to get their development businesses off the ground. We'll openly share pro formas, we'll share our math, we'll share our construction budgets. We're happy to be an open book as often as we can be. And one thing that we've had to figure out is in building this business, this was not immediately clear when we started the business. I'm relatively new to the real estate development industry, was that you're effectively balancing 2 very different objectives in a business model that in some cases are conflicting with each other. On the one side, you're saying, hey, I believe in this city. I believe in the long-term potential. I want to own rental here. These are good assets to own for decades. On the other side, you're saying, hey, I need to pay the bills. I need to be able to have a staff. I need to be able to afford the operating expenses of running a business. And sometimes these are conflicting. I mean, we've taken the position that on every one of our projects, we are really building for long-term equity value, long-term portfolio value. But in the meantime, figuring out a fair and simple fee structure so that when we do deliver projects with investors' capital, we're doing it in a way that is not overly complex and onerous to the pro forma. And so this is probably a dance that a lot of people find. And in some cases, you'll find some developers are very good at building long-term equity value and don't have to worry so much about short-term fees. And you'll also find some developers that really, really want to maximize on short-term fees, and equity value is maybe a little bit of a secondary consideration. So finding the right balance there is not necessarily easy, and we're still sort of refining that model as we go. The other piece that was an original insight, and we're starting to prove it out increasingly as we grow the team, is that we saw this as an asset class, and specifically small, mid-rise, missing middle rental housing as the type of business that you would be really, really effective at if you could vertically integrate effectively the entire stack of competencies from how to acquire land, how to underwrite deals, how to manage the entitlement process, how to oversee and manage construction, and eventually how to asset manage and property manage these buildings. And so that meant building a team that ultimately internalizes those capabilities. In some cases, obviously, there's specialists and expertise that we rely on, like a great team of consultants, many of whom you would have met here today, working with the right urban planners, the right architects, the right engineers, the right arborists, et cetera, et cetera. But as often as we can, what we want to do as a business is we want to learn from every project that we're executing on today and make sure that refines how we think about the next project. What did we get wrong? What did we overlook? Where were we too aggressive in our assumptions? Where were we too conservative in our assumptions? And effectively, every project that follows should get easier and simpler to repeat. So that's the flywheel that we're effectively trying to build. Going into 2026, knowing that we're probably going to touch hopefully 175 units starting construction this year. I say hopefully because 1 or 2 of those projects might tip into January or February of 2027. The goal is to then take those learnings, use that to effectively broaden our network of equity investors that are interested in the type of stuff that we do, and then double down and do maybe double that in the following year. One new thing that we're starting to explore a little bit more, and I'll use this as an opportunity for a shameless plug, we are realizing as we reach out to landowners, in many cases what we're doing is we're not reaching out to people that are listing their properties for sale. We just see an undeveloped piece of land in a neighborhood that we like or down the street from our office, and we say, hey, I wonder what's going on at that site. We should try to get to know the landowner. And that's led us to some really interesting conversations about partnering with landowners around helping develop their properties, either in some form of partnership or just as a way to help improve a neighborhood, bring more housing options, and effectively do it as a professional service. So this is something that we're going to be starting to do in 2026, and I suspect we will take on more of these types of projects. And so, if you're in this room because you're curious about the potential development opportunity on a site that you own and you want to chat about that, we're always an open book. And I say that not as a sales pitch. We're also happy to just give you the playbook and say, here's how we would do it. If you want to do it, we're also happy to just be a helping hand along the way and maybe free advice along the way. So that's the lessons we're looking forward to. I'll say 2027 when we come back here, I'm sure a lot more of our lessons are going to be lessons learned in construction as we take these next 5 projects into the ground, lots of lessons to learn there in terms of the mistakes and opportunities to refine our approach to construction. We're fortunate today to have both a construction manager on our team and now a full-time site superintendent that we're sort of spreading across a couple projects and working with some great third-party construction managers where it makes sense on larger projects. So stay tuned. Every year feels like we're learning the next horizon of the business. We figured out how to buy land. We figured out how to underwrite deals. Now we're figuring out how to build buildings. And hopefully by next year, I'll be talking to you about the challenge of learning how to property manage a bunch of tenants. So, exciting times ahead. And if you're anywhere behind us in this journey trying to start your development business, please don't hesitate to get in touch, reach out, grab a coffee. Our playbook is your playbook. So happy to be an open book. That's it. If you want to get in touch with me, that's how you can find me. Thanks so much.